Everything you love was once a project. The apps you tap, the bridges you cross, the shows you stream. None of them happened by accident. Behind every one of them was a dream, a team, and a project manager trying to hold it all together. I'm Rick Morris, and this is AI Driven PM, the show where project managers stop playing games, embrace reality, and use AI to make dreams come true without burning out their people. Each week, we'll blend real world project war stories with practical ways to put AI to work. How to plan smarter, negotiate better dates, protect your team, and focus on the work that actually moves the needle. If you ever thought there has to be a better way to do this, then you're in the right place. Let's get to work. This is AI Driven PM. Welcome back to AI Driven PM. I'm Rick Morris. Now, the last two episodes, we talked about Aria and Atlas, agents that help you manage individual projects, risk intelligence, estimation discipline. But here's the thing about project management. You're never managing just one project. You're managing a portfolio, multiple teams, multiple initiatives, competing priorities, limited capacity. And if you're working in an agile environment, which most of you are now, you're managing sprints, 2-week cycles, commitments, velocity, burn down charts. And here's the question that keeps executives up at night. Are we predictable? Not are we busy? Everyone's busy. Not are we delivering features? Of course you are. The question is, when you commit to a sprint, does it actually get done? And if it doesn't, if stories slide or if velocity is erratic or if commitments don't hold up, why? Well, that's what PACE answers, the Predictability and Capacity Engine. This is the agent that tells you the truth about your agile teams. And today, I'm going to show you a real sprint report, which is actual client data, where the truth may not have been as what they expected. But because we could see it, we could fix it. Now, first, let me set the stage. Agile has been a dominant methodology in software development for the past 20 years now. Scrum, Kanban, SAFe, you got your daily stand-ups, your sprint planning, your retrospectives, and you got metrics, velocity, burn down, story points completed. But here's what drives me crazy. Most of those are lagging indicators. They're vanity metrics. They're showing you that you're busy, but not necessarily delivering value. They tell you what already happened. Velocity tells you how much you delivered last sprint. Burn down tells you where you were yesterday. But none of them are saying, hey, are we getting better or worse at executing predictably over time? And none of them tell you why stories are slipping. Is it because the team's overcommitted? Or is it because the stories aren't ready for execution when they enter the sprint? That distinction matters because if the problem is capacity, you adjust the team size or the sprint commitment. But if the problem is readiness, if stories are entering the sprint without clear requirements or without designs or without the dependencies resolved, then you got a process problem upstream. And you can't fix a process problem by adding people. PACE makes that distinction. So there's two core metrics, right? First is your slide rate. This is the percentage of stories that don't finish in the sprint that they were committed to. So if you committed to 50 stories and 45 complete, then your slide rate is 10%. That means 1 in 10 stories slipped to the next sprint. Now, some slide is normal. Things happen, right? A story turns out to be more complex than you thought, or a dependency breaks, or somebody gets sick. But here's the benchmark. If you're running a disciplined agile team, your slide rate should be really under 15%, ideally under 10%. If you're consistently above 20%, then there's a problem. Either you're overcommitting or your stories aren't ready for execution. Then there's readiness debt. This is the percentage of stories that entered the sprint unready for execution. Well, what does unready mean? It means the story didn't mean your definition of ready. Requirements aren't clear, designs aren't done, dependencies aren't resolved, acceptance criteria aren't defined. The story got pulled into the sprint anyway, maybe because the product owner wanted it, or maybe because the team thought they could figure it out along the way. But here's what happens. Unready stories always take longer than planned. They create churn, they create rework, they consume capacity that should have gone to completing other stories. So even if the story eventually gets done, it steals time from the sprint. Readiness debt is a leading indicator. It predicts slide rate. If 40% of your stories enter the sprint unready, then you will have slide. It's not a question of if, it's a question of how much. So let me tell you about a real engagement. We were working with a large client, a large financial services company. They had agile development teams working on a new platform, and they've been running sprints for nearly 2 years. 43 sprint cycles, nearly 50,000 user stories were delivered. And on the surface, everything looked fine. Stories were getting done, features were shipping, velocity was stable. But leadership had a concern. They felt like commitments weren't holding up the way they used to. Sprints that used to finish clean were now ending with carryover. Teams were saying we'll get to it in the next sprint more often. and they asked us to take a look at it. So I pulled 2 years of Jira data, 48,621 issues to be exact, and every sprint from 2024 to 2026. Now, imagine how long analysis like that might take, or how many times you sift through it. But I had a secret agent. I had Pace. And when I ran it through Pace, what I found was pretty interesting, right? The team wasn't getting worse at execution. They were getting worse at readiness, and it was accelerating over time. Let me explain how Pace analyzes sprint data. You export your sprint history from Jira, Azure DevOps, Planner, spreadsheets, whatever you're using. Pace can ingest it, every issue, every sprint, every status change. Then Pace normalizes that data. It identifies which stories were committed at the start of each sprint, which stories completed in that sprint, which stories slipped to the next sprint or multiple sprints, which stories entered the sprint unready, which was flagged as not meeting your definition of ready, or added mid-sprint, or blocked immediately. Then Pace calculates the core metrics for each sprint. So it'll do a slide rate, which is stories that slipped divided by stories that committed, right? Readiness debt is unready stories divided by the stories that were committed. And here's the key. Pace doesn't just give you the numbers for one sprint. It gives you the trend over time. Are you getting better? Are you getting worse? Is slide rate increasing or decreasing? Is readiness debt climbing? Are there specific sprint cycles where everything went sideways? Pace can surface all of that in mere minutes. Pace produces 4 deliverables. A sprint dashboard, and this is an Excel workbook with every sprint listed. It's got the sprint name, committed stories, completed stories, slip stories, slide rate, readiness debt. It's sorted chronologically and it's color coded, right? So green, slide rate was under 10%, readiness debt was under 15%. Yellow is that slide rate's 10 to 20 and readiness 15 to 30. Red, slide rate's over 20, readiness is over 30. And you can see this trend at a glance. It gives you your best and worst sprints. So it identifies the top performing sprint, the one with the lowest slide rate and readiness debt. That's your benchmark and proof that the team can be that predictable when the conditions are right. And then Pace identifies the worst performing sprints, the ones with the highest readiness debt, those that you can investigate what happened and how many stories entered unready and what was going on. Now it gives you this trend analysis or a narrative summary. So it can say, hey, listen, over the past 12 months, slide rate has increased from 10 to 25%. Readiness debt has gone from 12 to 37%. The team's not getting worse at execution. They're being asked to execute unready work. And that narrative is critical because it tells leadership that this is a process problem, not a people problem. But Pace doesn't just give you data, it gives you actions. Based on the trend, Pace can recommend, reducing your sprint capacity or, helping you build execution buffer or implement a hard gate on definition of ready or investigate upstream capacity constraints like design, architecture, product owner bandwidth. It tells you to conduct retrospectives on the top 3 worst sprints to identify the root causes. These aren't generic kind of suggestions. They're targeted to what the data shows. And then it even has a health check integration. And this is where Pace can get really powerful. Pace doesn't just look backwards, it looks at your current sprint in progress. It calculates how many stories are committed, how many are complete so far, how many entered unready, projected slide rate if the current trends hold, and it flags alerts like, hey, your current sprint has 64% readiness debt. It's the highest on record, or it's got a slide projected rate of 47%, which is more than double your baseline. It becomes an early warning system. So leadership doesn't have to wait until the sprint closes to know that there's a problem. Pace could tell you that now. And here's the integration. Pace works alongside ARIA's health check mode. So ARIA looks at project level health, right? Schedule trajectory, budget integrity, stakeholder engagement. Pace looks at team level execution discipline. Are sprints predictable? Is readiness stable? Is capacity well managed? And together, they can give you a complete picture. But enough talking about this complete picture. Let me show you. And let me show you the analysis that took about 12 minutes to do once I ran it through Pace. But first, we're going to run a quick commercial, and I'll show you this on the other side.
In today's economy, leaders are looking for a different kind of consulting partner. A partner that will work with you to understand your culture, technology, and employees. A partner that will develop the solutions you need, not the solutions they know best. For us, it's never been about simply checking a box. Since we were founded in 1999, Centric Consulting has established a reputation for solving its clients' toughest problems by delivering flexible, tailored, cost-efficient solutions, all centered on the right outcomes for each business. It's all part of our mission to deliver an unmatched experience you won't get anywhere else. Centered on what's best for you, Centric is ready to guide you on the journey ahead.
And we're back and I actually have the real output that we created as we did this analysis. So you can see first, I have a configuration here. This is something I can put into the front, but I have another metric that's really, really important that I'll share with you here in a moment as well. But part of this is like, do we have the actual rates per developer? A lot of times we do. If not, we'll just use a blended rate by developer, like in this case, $75 an hour. But if we are wrong, it's adjustable and it'll update everything here. We also have productive hours by sprint. So we figure 70 out of the 80-hour work week. To account for any kind of like non-productive work or keeping the lights on type activity, which then gives us a sprint cost default by person, as we go through this. So going to the sprint summary, we ran from 2024 to 2026. And first off, it was smart enough to pick up that a new team was created within this backlog and that team started in 2026 and they were about 5 sprints in. So it kept it as a team A that it could recognize. So you had 2023, 2024, 25, and 26. 23 was a partial year, so that's why I keep saying 24 to 26. So you can see the 26 sprints, and 11 sprints so far in 2026 that have been created. You can see the completed points, what their velocity is per sprint. And in this case, right, this team looks great. The velocity is increasing, but just increasing velocity doesn't truly tell the story. Well, it's easy to see that velocity increased because we also added developers. And one of the things we can start to see is the average points per developer. So it's pulling that analysis for us. But here's a new metric that a lot of people don't track, and it's actually cost by story point. And that should be done sprint by sprint. It becomes a very powerful metric to show efficiency of the team. So obviously, if you look in this case, in 2025, you can see right here that they had a velocity about 18 points per sprint. There's 4.2 developers, and they're doing 4.33, but their average cost is about $1,212. Well, obviously the costs go up when we have 6 developers, but what we're showing is that they're actually more efficient with the 6 developers than they were with 4.2. So all of this seems like really good metrics. Like, hey, we're getting more velocity. The team seems to be getting more efficient. But what's happening is their slide rate is growing. So this is the number of stories that slid. This 11.8% is now 18%. And this new team is at a 28%. That's huge. That means we're accepting unready work. So normally what happens when you miss a sprint is executives go right to the developers and they're like, hey, how do we increase velocity? How do we get more capacity? And those are wrong questions to ask, right? Those are busyness things. It's like by tracking slide rate, I'm able to say, hey, we seem to be accepting more unready work, or maybe less, decisions, or things are sliding because we didn't maybe have a design, or we didn't have the architecture, or maybe there was unclear requirements, or QE didn't know how to test it. And so, and like a real world example that I can recall from this client is that something was completed, but they couldn't test it until there was dependencies on it, but they didn't discover that till the sprint. So there was whole time consumed in talking with QE and the developers of what we were going to do with this ticket. Do we close it? Do we create another one for, like, how do we do this? Well, we should have had that conversation pre-sprint. We shouldn't have had that conversation in the sprint that was then consuming capacity. These are the types of things that get buried when you're just looking at velocity, but slide rate starts to expose these things. So this really, again, at high level tells us that team A, our points per developer are getting better. The cost per point is falling, but our slide rate's starting to increase, which is going to become an issue for us. Then you have your sprint trend. So this actually would basically show us how well we're performing across each sprint each year. And so again, we can see baselines, we can see costs, we can see slide rate. Really quickly, the one that jumps out here in 2025, we had almost half of the sprint slide. And so that allows me to then hone in on that specific sprint to see if I could see what was going on or what happened. So there are some key anomalies here, but there's some nice ones. Like here, we had several sprints that didn't slide at all, right? But here we're starting to see a lot more slide and a higher consistent number. I can look at developer productivity. Imagine how long some of these reports take. And again, this took minutes to generate this spreadsheet. And by the way, the spreadsheet's branded, it's pretty, it's got graphs, it's good to look at. And so I can see like who my key developers are, who's my highest performing developer, and who do I need to coach and why. And of course, this isn't fair. They've only been active for one sprint. They only have one completed point. So obviously it was $5,250, right? But when I start to see 11 sprints, and you're consistently about 2 points per sprint, whereas this person up here, right, it's at 4 points. It's pretty interesting just to start to see again where's some coaching that I need to do on the team. Who do I need to check in with? Who's starting to kind of decline? What's happening? This was also an interesting view that I would never been able to do before. But this is looking at each developer and what team they're actually participating on based on the backlog. And I can pull the entire backlogs here to be able to do this, but you also can start to see some of the churn. Like here, this person got moved to team B on sprint 10 here, but then still completed work in sprint 11, didn't get anything done 12, maybe they were out, and then completed work in sprint 13. So I can start to see how splitting the teams is pulling productivity from both team A and team B, which may contribute to some of that sprint slide. But you can kind of see it's not real consistent. I don't have a consistent across the board. And here, like, some people it was on team D over here in team A. It's hard to even see what their primary is on these sprints. But this most consistent person up here, this developer one, has been the most consistent across the board. And then it'll give me like the raw numbers and then dashboards by team. So this becomes really, really powerful when we start to go through and again, start looking at our readiness. So you can see, sprint 12, we had 45.5% sprint slide versus 16.4, but you can see it's consistently kind of going up over the last three. So this indicates that I've got a problem I've got to dive into and find out why are we accepting unready work and what's happening between them. It does that for this team B dashboard as well. So this is a lot of powerful information done in a very, very short time frame. Well, what happens is sprint by sprint by sprint, at the end of each sprint, I just, again, take the full backlog, feed it to Pace and say, hey, give me the next view. Now, I also do this at an organizational level. So I have an organization I'm working with right now that had a very, very powerful question that's almost impossible to answer by any metrics that we trend to during this time. That question is, hey, if I add 40 people, how do I know we're more productive? How do I know what they're going to do? How do I know what more I got done by hiring those people? A productivity engine like this will show you if we have an entire backlog that has everything in it, KTLO, bugs, enhancements, all that kind of stuff, and I can trend cost by story point by that team across time as well as their velocity, I can start to show the team is getting either more or less efficient in what's happening. From there, I can say, once we added these 3 people, we were able to do X more points at a cost by story point of X or Y, and then be able to tell you whether or not we were more efficient and specifically what additional work we were able to accomplish. These are metrics that have been unheard of for a long time that something like Pace and an agent like Pace can help us answer. Here's what nobody wants to say out loud about Agile. It's easy to do Agile. Stand-ups, retrospectives, sprint planning, you can go through all of the motions, right? But it's hard to be predictable. Predictability requires discipline. It requires that you enforce definition of ready, even when there's pressure to pull unready work into the sprint. It requires that you say no when the backlog isn't groomed. It requires that you protect the team's capacity instead of overcommitting. And most organizations don't want to do that because discipline feels like friction. It feels like you're slowing down. But here's the paradox. Discipline is what makes you fast. When stories enter ready, they complete on time. When sprints finish clean, velocity stabilizes. When commitments hold up, stakeholders trust you. Now, Pace measures that discipline. It shows you where it's breaking down, and it tells you how to restore it. Now, everything I've shown you today is for one team. But imagine you're running a portfolio, 10 teams, 20 teams, 100 teams. Pace scales. You run Pace across all your teams and you get a portfolio level view. Which teams are predictable? Which teams are degrading? Which teams have chronic readiness debt? Which teams are overcommitted? And you can compare. Team A has an 8% slide rate. Team B has a 30% slide rate. Both are working on similar projects. What's the difference? Pace tells you. And then you can spread the best practices from team A to team B. That's organizational learning at the portfolio level, right? That's really what Pace is here to do. Now, next episode is the finale, Gatekeeper, Portfolio Intelligence. ARIA protects individual projects from risk. Atlas estimates individual projects with discipline. Pace measures team-level execution predictability. And then Gatekeeper operates at the portfolio level. It helps you decide which projects should we even start. Because here's the hard truth. Most organizations say yes to too many things. And when everything is a priority, nothing is. Gatekeeper uses AI to reality check your portfolio, to surface the impossible dates, to show you where capacity doesn't exist, to force the hard conversations before you even commit. We're going to talk about how portfolio intake should work and how AI changes that game. Until then, let's go make some dreams come true. You've been watching AI Driven PM with Rick Morris. We'll see you on the next episode. I'm Rick Morris, and this has been AI Driven PM. Keep protecting your people, telling the truth, and making dreams come true.